This week's video essay is sponsored by Soleil Space. Soleil Space is a global community streaming platform which highlights diverse and independent filmmaking from countries deserving of more representation within the present-day cinematic landscape. You can stream a wide variety of never-before-seen stories and experience unique social features enhancing our enjoyment of these films. Viewers can create groups for film discussions, host watch parties with friends, provide recommendations, and all while directly supporting the filmmakers involved. And for filmmakers, Soleil Space offers distribution of independent productions for new filmmakers from underrepresented communities. Filmmakers can also use Soleil Space as a platform for networking, and the direct tip feature allows independent filmmakers to receive extra support from the audience. As I've been using the service myself, I've been enjoying the ease in recommending films on my profile, as well as being able to start a group specifically for You Have Been Watching Films, which allows for another platform for discussing films I've recently watched, as well as setting up watch parties with other users. I would easily recommend Kokoro to Kokoro by Andre Hayato Saito, a poetic and spiritual autobiographical short about the filmmaker's deceased grandmother and her friendship in Japan that centers on a promise to meet again in the afterlife. Yusura Bushi's The Coming Night, a mysterious, near-dystopian fable of an ostracized boy pushed away from the community during a dangerous natural event, which causes his older sister to search for him, and Stephen Chow's Monkey, a grisly short thriller focusing on a daughter's revenge against her parents, her father physically abusive, and her mother enabling him. These are three stylistically different films, which I feel showcases just a fraction of the versatility and diversity on display with Soleil Space. If Soleil Space sounds like your cup of tea, you can join for free for 60 days with code YouHave60. Signing up this way supports Soleil Space and its filmmakers to continue distributing such brilliant works, but it also supports the continuation of this channel too. When you sign up, please make sure to share any recommendations you may have in the comments or in the channel's group on Soleil Space. Francis retells of a troubling experience in which he and his best friend Alan visited a travelling fair in their town, watching a performance led by the enigmatic Caligari, who brings the somnambulist Césaire out from his trance to predict the future and answer any questions of the audience. When Alan asks about when he will die, Césaire suggests before dawn, leading to Alan being killed in his apartment, motivating Francis to solve Alan's murder, with Caligari and Césaire as his prime suspects. However, does Francis have his sights set on the right targets? Who are Caligari and Césaire? Is there more to this mystery than Francis can comprehend? This is Robert Wiene's magnificent psychological horror German Expressionist classic, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Instantly recognisable for its inimitable aesthetic, consisting of emphasised pointed shadows and impossible angles replicating the sharp and striking shapes of classic German Expressionist paintings, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari continues to inspire filmmakers a century later with its captivating mystery and a narrative twist that, while commonplace within present-day cinema, packs a gargantuan impact on a first-time watch. The legacy of The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari cannot be understated. A key milestone in German Expressionist cinema, the influence of The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari can be seen stretching across cinematic history, inspiring the entirety of the noir genre, with its central mystery and appreciation for shadows, and all the way into the present day within the works of Guillermo del Toro, Tim Burton and Henry Selick, who have found beauty within Caligari's proto-Gothic aesthetic. Roger Ebert, in his review of The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, a film placed firmly in his great films list, discussed the impact Wiene's film had on German Expressionist cinema, having written that a case can be made that Caligari was the first true horror film. There had been earlier ghost stories, and the eerie serial Phantomas, made between 1913 to 1914, but their characters were inhabiting a recognisable world. Caligari creates a mindscape, a subjective psychological fantasy. In this world, unspeakable horror becomes possible. Caligari is said to be the first example in cinema of German Expressionism, a visual style in which not only the characters but the world itself is out of joint. I don't know of another film that used its extreme distortions and discordant angles, but its overall attitude certainly cleared the way for The Golem, Nosferatu, Metropolis and M. In one of the best-known books ever written about film, From Caligari to Hitler, the art historian Siegfried Kracauer argued that the rise of Nazism was foretold by the preceding years of German films, which reflected a world at wrong angles and lost values. In his reading, Caligari was Hitler, and the German people were sleepwalkers under his spell. Ebert argues that while there are earlier examples of cinematic horror, the cabinet of Dr. Caligari's removal from grounded reality presented a subjectivity in its narrative not previously seen in filmmaking. Caligari's mesmeric influence abundantly clear with its German cinematic contemporaries. Additionally, the reference to Siegfried Kracauer's monumental book From Caligari to Hitler highlights the seemingly prophetic foreshadowing of fascism's rise in Germany. Caligari, with all his advantageous means of manipulation over Césaire, representative of a fearful dictatorial power, and Césaire the somnambulist, a representation of people bent to the whims of leaders to fulfill their nefarious deeds. While this interpretation might be a stretch to some viewers, the comparison is frighteningly apt that it's worth considering how life can often imitate art. The aesthetic of the cabinet of Dr. Caligari is incredible 100 years later, its shadows so jagged and dark, they appear to be an abyss with the potential to slice. The angles of buildings, apartments and streets are so distorted and warped, each location feels impossibly maze-like. For as striking a contrast the angular dark shadows and painted light creates, the cabinet of Dr. Caligari is never truly black and white either, due to its tinted frames within the surviving version of the film, which often brings an additional layer of atmosphere to its scenes. Bluish-green hues for nighttime, browns as if a distant memory, appropriate as the story is told from the perspective of a retelling. The film is immensely stylized, to every inch of its existence, likely having played a significant role beyond cinema and into the world of Gothic fashion and style too. However, this distinctive style isn't simply for the sake of being visually memorable, as Roger Ebert also elaborated on within his review. The actors inhabit a jagged landscape of sharp angles and tilted walls and windows, staircases climbing crazy diagonals, trees with spiky leaves, grass that looks like knives. These radical distortions immediately set the film apart from all earlier ones. The stylized sets, obviously two-dimensional, must have been a lot less expensive than realistic sets and locations, but I doubt that's why the director Robert Wiene wanted them. He's making a film of delusions and deceptive appearances, about madmen and murder, and his characters exist at right angles to reality. None of them can quite be believed, nor can they believe one another. The art direction of the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, with its meticulously designed sets and style, isn't simply about presenting a horror film with a distinct visual aesthetic. As a psychological horror film, the cabinet of Dr. Caligari is presenting a delusional retelling with unrealistic proportions to indicate the unreliable nature of Francis, the man recollecting his supposed experience to another man. If Francis's retelling is full of impossibly angled structures and frighteningly sharp shadows not expected within grounded reality, then surely his reliability as a narrator comes into question, as if the film's own stylistic direction is a foreshadowing of Francis's own mental state, therefore giving the film's distinctive aesthetic additional narrative significance. This leads effectively into the central mystery and eventual twist of the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, a narrative as psychologically warped and zigzagging as its aesthetic, shifting from murderous accusations, malevolent manipulation of power, and doubting one's own senses. The twist ending of the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the revelation that Francis's recollection is created from elements of his own reality as a patient within a psychiatric hospital, might be commonly recognisable now. We've seen this twist numerous times since, but the cabinet of Dr. Caligari had firmly established its impact over a century ago. The ending is still likely to shock viewers on their first watch, with little to no prior knowledge of the film. Its implementation is directed with an observant brilliance. This twist doesn't necessarily come out from nowhere. Francis telling his older companion that Jane is his fiancée at the beginning of the film, as she wanders into the scene within a distant, clueless daze. Francis's retelling of events so manipulated and warped that the setting is far removed from reality. There are clues which indicate that there is a twist coming, and yet its eventual impact lingers long after the film finishes. Patients in hospital were significant parts of Francis's story. The titular Dr. Caligari is the psychiatric hospital director that strikes fear into Francis, possibly alluding to off-screen trauma caused by outdated methods undertaken to treat mental health struggles at the time. The realization that Francis is mentally vulnerable, believing his own narrative to be reality, plagued by fear of those around him, is absolutely devastating. While the film's portrayal of reality is in itself a subjective simplification of a psychiatric hospital, the film provides a brief glimpse into a frightened vulnerability of mentally struggling patients, a continual state of fear that seems truly inescapable, and within that never-ending susceptibility lies the true horror of the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. In conclusion, the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari remains a significant cinematic monument a century after its release. A pioneer amongst its German Expressionism contemporaries, an undeniable influence on the thriller and horror genres, filmmakers and Gothic art, the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari also remains a devastating portrayal of malevolent coercive control and the unreliability of the human psyche. For over 100 years, this film continues to unsettle and captivate audiences, demonstrating an early mastery of cinematic language that continues to remain relevant. Here's hoping that its haunting legacy continues to persevere for another century. A special thank you to my incredible tier Patreon supporter Gil, and my super tier Patreon supporters Constantine Bombelli and Jamie.